Welcome to the Mom CEO podcast. I'm your host, Esther Roach. Join me as we explore the dynamic intersection of motherhood and entrepreneurship. From the challenges to the triumphs, we're here to unravel it all. Get ready for insightful conversations, practical wisdom, and a whole lot of inspiration. Let's embark on this empowering journey together. Hello and welcome to the Mom CEO podcast. I'm your host, Esther Roach, and today I'm joined by Whitney. Hello, Whitney, and welcome to the show.
Hey Esther, thanks for having me.
No, you're very welcome. Would you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, my name is Whitney Popa. I own a boutique copywriting agency outside of Seattle in the United States. And I also have a publishing company where I publish art from Western writers in the United States as well, including my first book, which is a small booklet about grief.
Oh, well, thank you for that introduction. I didn't hear you mention that you're a mum as well.
I am a mom as well, yes.
And your kids do play a big part in what you do, is that right?
Yeah, so I always joke that my son kicked me in the uterus to finally go my own way. And it's I was asking before we started recording where your audience is based, and everywhere in the world has different maternity leave policies. In the US, probably most people know it's epically bad here. And especially if you started a job, if you hadn't been there for a year. So I didn't qualify for any benefits of leave for a vaginal delivery, and that just didn't always planned to start my own company one day, and I still wasn't planning to. I was going to find daycares and things for my son, but I just couldn't think of how I was going to make it work commuting an hour each way and dropping him off. And there are so many laws here that it didn't make sense. And so, in the midst of all of that, a client that started my business just dropped into my life, and I was able to start my business while I was on that 6 weeks unpaid maternity leave, which was a huge gift for me. And that was 7 years ago.
Oh, wow. So 6 weeks maternity leave. Were you going to go back to work after the 6 weeks? Was that the plan?
Yeah, I was supposed to go back to work full time.
And then obviously you had this client drop by, and did that kickstart your business? Did you then sort of plan it? How's that journey been since then?
What I like to tell people, because at least in the time that I started my business, and the reason I hadn't before is I thought I had to have a business plan. I thought I had to have it all thought out and like, this is what I'm going to do and have all the wheels in motion in a very formalized way. And I like to say that I started my business backwards because the client found me first. And then they said, we have to pay you this certain way where we can only pay a company, not a person. So I had to register myself as a business. And that's what created this whole thing that I've now been in for 7 years. And in that time, I had another child too. And it's just been a cool thing because my business and my life are so interconnected. And I wanted my kids to see that. And especially when I was pregnant and first gave birth, I thought about, what do I want these kids to see from me? What kind of mom do I want them to see in the world? And also my happiness and joy and fulfillment in providing certain things, but also doing it my way. I'm very kind of a maverick that way. I don't really like to be told what to do or be treated like I'm still in school as to like, asking permission to go to the bathroom type things. So I was always built to do this. I just didn't know or have the mechanisms of how.
Oh, wow. So it sounds like it's been obviously an interesting journey, if you like. And I like the fact that you've mentioned doing things backward, because a lot of mums get stuck on that where they feel they need to have everything sorted out and planned out before they start. You're obviously fortunate enough that the client found you. But what advice would you have for somebody who's thinking about it? They haven't got a client there, but they are thinking or considering going into business, especially from the perspective of running the home and then obviously balancing, things out.
I always tell people to cheat on their boyfriend. So when I was still in my corporate life, I took little side gigs all the time just to show myself that I could and to earn a little bit of money on the side. And that really gave me the confidence that once this client came that I wasn't expecting necessarily, but I had put the wheels in motion and I'm very spiritual too. So I had given the little nods to the universe of I'm ready and I'm open to it. I also suggest to people to tell a few close and supportive people in your life, not everybody, but a few people who can hold that dream for you as well. And the person who ended up sending me this client was connected to one of my best friends, and he had shared what I had shared. And I didn't even remember saying that I was open to being what we call freelance in the US. And I think it's the same term everywhere, but I didn't remember sharing that. And then this person who I was, 3 degrees connected to talked to a friend at work who needed somebody, and it all went from there. And then I became more confident, and because I had that client, then I posted on LinkedIn and made a few very conscientious efforts of reaching out to people and responding in Facebook groups. That's been really good for me. But that first client really set all the wheels in motion. And years before that, I had set the intention. I didn't know how I was going to get there, but I had made a list of where I wanted my career to take me. And then I had been cheating on my boyfriend. I'd been dabbling a little bit.
Yeah. And it's important to sort of have a plan because obviously you'd written something. So it's not something that you just woke up one day and thought, I'm just going to do this. Which I think is another important element to studying anything. It's that research, isn't it? And just having some kind of an idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was at the time too, and I don't really want to date myself too much, or give anything undue credit, but I mean, it was at the time where people didn't really have, like, I wasn't even allowed to have a laptop from my jobs that I took home necessarily. So there was a lot of, you had to be in the office, you had to sit in this seat. And the type of work that I did, I started my career in this combination of PR and social media, and I loved what I did. And I was so confused that I had to just sit at somebody else's computer all the time when I was also traveling for work a lot too. And so they treated it like this, it was this big privilege to have a laptop and essentially work for them 24/7.
Yeah.
And so I was like, what if I could do this and do it for more people and on my own time and raise my own kids as much as I wanted to.
Yeah.
And so you're right that there was a plan in the sense that I had a general loose idea
Mhm.
of where I wanted to go, but I didn't fixate on the details. I'm a big picture person. And so the details, and I'm also controlling. So it's interesting that I'm not a details person because and I've become less controlling over time, but it was this thing that I just kind of knew, and then I was open to seeing how the details would figure themselves out.
Oh,
I was
wow.
also distracted by being pregnant and having a job and a family.
That probably pushed you more towards, achieving the goal and the loose plan to sort of think, well, I want a better sort of life. And like you mentioned, you wanted to be able to raise your kids as much as possible. So, another positive reason for you to go for it even more so.
For
And,
sure.
with so you've got the copywriting agency. Um, do you do any social media as well? Because that's part of your background, or you
I
make.
do more. Yeah, so I pivoted. I had this nightmare when I was pregnant. I can't remember if it was the first or the second time. And I'd been a social media manager at really big, sexy US companies. And at those companies, there is a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of data and reporting, and all of that is pretty necessary for those jobs. But I felt very constricted by that. And so I remember being pregnant the first or the second time and having this nightmare of me being wheeled in to give birth and being on my phone and saying, I just have to post really quick before we do this. And that's when I decided maybe I shouldn't be in social media in the same way anymore. And I still love social media, but my relationship with that, I have a few clients where I would call that I would say they're grandmothered into me managing their social media, but it's much more free form in the sense that I'm not sending them reports on KPIs every month. They're small businesses, they want to have a presence, they want some consistency and awareness, but they understand what social media is and how it's a tool for them versus this big monster of a Fortune 100 company that needs what it needs. And there are a lot more players and politics and that kind of thing. So I don't take on new social media management clients, but I do consulting for people and write captions and that kind of thing. I've really moved my business since that nightmare into more long form writing where I decide the deadlines. And I actually, as I've expanded my team, I met with one of my writers a couple weeks ago, and all of the people on my team are parents, which I think says a lot about us too, and how we run our lives and the structure that I created intentionally for myself that I have trickled out to them less intentionally, but just kind of by osmosis and extension was that because social media is so tied to very intense and short deadlines, I didn't want that for us. And so when I assign them a blog for a client, for example, I give as much leeway as I can, big long deadlines so that they can really manage their lives around this is what you need to do for the month versus here's what it's National Donut Day. We need to get something up today. I don't want that urgency. I don't want that stress for me, for my life, for my kids, for my husband. And so he was complimenting me without me even talking to him about that. He was just saying, I just love how you give me these briefs and then I deliver it by that deadline. Writers are all very arbitrary deadline people. We love a deadline. We love to work with that deadline, whatever our relationship with that deadline is, whether it's like 2 days in advance or a month in advance, but we're really able to structure our lives around that. And he was complimenting me for the lack of stress. And I almost got weepy because I created that system and that way of operating for myself after that nightmare so that I wouldn't suffer. And I didn't intend to grow my company at that time. So I didn't think about how it would impact other people positively. And so for me, it was like one of the best compliments I could have gotten.
Oh, fantastic. That's a brilliant way to look at it and set it up in, your terms, basically, to just make sure that you're still being there for the family as well as managing the business without being too stressed or anything. Things happen in life, but it's just if you can minimize them and work within limits, then I suppose it's a win-win, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's not to say that I'm not ever stressed or that I
Mm.
feel like maybe I work a lot and odd hours because I am very excited about my companies and I care. The relationship with the work is different because it's on my terms and it's energizing versus draining and doing it for somebody else to make money. I really think of what I do as a service to the world and to my family and to myself and like my life mission here on the planet versus contributing to somebody else's bank account, which was great. And I learned a ton, but I don't want that for my life anymore. And so when I'm working on the weekends or late at night because I've had meetings all day, I really go back to what is this for? Who is this for? And who is it serving? And I have not gotten sick. I have not burned myself out because I have a good sense of self-care and the reasons that I'm here doing what I do. So some people might look at me and think, "Oh my gosh, she does a lot and she works a lot," and that is true. And I'm also thinking of it very intentionally of myself as a big part of this whole ecosystem that I'm creating.
Oh wow. And it's all about that intention as well, because like you said, you can easily fall in the trap of burning out, and then you're no good to yourself or anybody else around you. You mentioned obviously with the work you do, you love connecting people through stories. Tell us a
Yes.
little bit about that.
I believe that I was born a storyteller. And so, one of the main things that I do for my clients, especially because I think of myself as like the core demographic of who would be my client, these like millennial women, parents who have been trained to not trust themselves and their own voices. And so a lot of my clients come to me because they don't know what their voice is for their business. And that's a lot of what we do at first. So we we add a lot of storytelling into how we talk about their business. And people get very, especially women, get very spun up about that. They they think, why would anybody care about the fact that my first concert was the Backstreet Boys when I was 15 or whatever it is? But I tell them too, if you are the business, people want to get to know you. So when they're on your website, you add, I call them sparklers. They're your fun facts, your freak flags, the things that make you unique, and you can weave them in however you want. Some people would call them random, but I find that they contribute to this really beautiful picture because for example, when I was pregnant, I picked my OB because she said that she liked cats. And I thought, she had one little line on her bio about that. And I thought, if I am going to be here with you in these very vulnerable positions, at least we can talk about cats. And anytime somebody is exchanging money for services, it is a very vulnerable thing for them to do, especially for you to hold the energy of their story and communicating what you do with the world. And so I have a strong emphasis on the storytelling aspect. And I want a website, a piece of digital zeros and ones to be a place where people see themselves in you. For example, I'll say I have on my website that I like off-road vehicles, and it could be a Jeep, it could be a Bronco, it could be a four-wheeler. I like them all. The the reason I say that is that I know somebody's that's going to resonate with somebody, and those people are my people. We don't want to work with people who aren't our people. It's hard. And so the storytelling aspect makes those connections seamless. And then we bring that into their other materials, their newsletters, their blogs, so that you can keep the conversation going. And so many people I've noticed are really hesitant to focus on the story because they think, why would anybody care that I did this or had this experience? But it's all through that connection where people can see themselves or that relatable moment. And so it's really the foundation of what we do in my business. And it takes a lot of education to get people to understand why it's so important.
Yeah, and I really like that because I think a lot of people, like you said, there is this fear element because sometimes I think it's just the feeling of thinking I'm not enough or who's going to want to listen to what I have to say or anything to do with me. You don't put it with business, do you? You kind of separate the two because it's just normal because that's how you're trained.
Totally. Yeah. And we're also trained like to take yourself out of it, make it all about the customer. But at the end of the day, that customer has to know, like, and trust you.
Mhm.
And if they don't feel like they can trust you through your vulnerability, through your stories, whatever, and every business is different and how much you share within that really, there's a whole spectrum.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, if they're buying a small business, they're buying you. They're not buying the services you're selling. They're buying how you make them feel.
Mhm. No, absolutely. And moving on from what you do on the copywriting side, I want to find out a little bit more about your book. So you've got
Sure.
a book. Obviously, you mentioned earlier that it's about grief. Why that particular topic?
It's interesting because I've been having a lot of conversations with people where they ask me why or what was your
Mhm.
inspiration? And I was not inspired. I was not thinking, just like my business, I was not thinking, I want to write a grief book. I lost my dad when I was 26. He died of brain cancer. He told me to never lose my writing. I promised him that I wouldn't, not really having a thought or intention around what that would look like because so much of my life already includes writing. I have an English degree. I love books. I love reading. I love writing. I always have. And so in my spare time, I have been working on a novel for years, thinking this is it. And that always felt too big, too scary, and that I wasn't ready yet. And then one day, I meditate every morning. I was just sitting in meditation, and this little story that is basically a 42-page metaphor of a woman who is trying to go about her day, being hit over and over with waves of grief and resisting them, literally putting her hand out to try to stop the wave. And obviously that does not work for her. The it's kind of free verse, but not really. It's a little story that anyone who's mourned anything could see themselves in. And it just channeled through me one day. And I thought, this is it. This is how I have to start this new phase of my life, or this next phase on top of all the things that I'm doing, because I've always wanted to be a creative writer, even beyond what I do for my clients, create art for me as well and to help other people. And I don't know why I decided that this was it. This was the project. I just did. And I had an illustrator illustrate it with me, and I created a publishing house so I could publish more stories like this, because I don't really see them in the traditional publishing sphere. This is meant more for gift shops and flower shops and assisted living homes more than it is bookstores, which it is in bookstores and on Amazon and all those things. But that's not really where I'm wanting to find my people. It's really meant to serve people who are grieving. And I do think it was an extension of that conversation that I had with my dad that made me brave enough to do. It's a small, physically small thing that is a big deal to me and a lot of other people. I made it so that it fits in somebody's back pocket. My son read it. He was 6 when he read it. He's 7 now. He understood what it is. So it's appropriate for people 6 and up. And it really is just this tool that reminds you, not only are you not alone, and you don't have to spend too much time reading this, because anybody who's in grief is not trying to spend a lot of time reading anything. Mm-hmm. And that there is something more to say than just a card or flowers from somebody who gets it. And you can revisit this little thing anytime you need to check in on what your tools are and how you can take care of yourself. And the novel that I'm working on is kind of an extension of that. It always has been. So I think the small booklet came to me as just like that, the other point with my business, like just to get me to be brave enough to go to the next thing and do the next thing and share it, because it is such a vulnerable thing when you're sharing your own art. The storytelling aspect of my copywriting business is important and very vulnerable, but it's a whole different thing when it's like, I created this from my soul for you. Here's a gift. I hope you'll accept it. And it's just been a huge exercise in my personal development. I'll say that.
No, it's interesting you mention all that, and the book actually being on grief, because I've literally just finished a recording with somebody else, and we had a similar discussion because they've had their own journey with it. And it's just it affects a lot of people, but I don't think it's sort of spoken about that much. And you
right.
need all these, as much aids as you can get to support people that are going through all this, and not just the grown-ups, but it's also the children, because we all take to it in different ways, and we all grieve in different ways and different periods of time. I don't think you ever stop, but it's just that's always there, because I lost both of my parents as well. They're both late, but different times in their lives. But it's such a difficult thing to explain to somebody else, when you go through the notions of everything. So it's hard, isn't it?
It is. And it's exactly that, that I am realizing again, it wasn't like, I'm going to do this in this way to help these people. It's become this thing that I'm able to give as my gift from my experience to others to show them you're feeling isolated, even if you have a million people around you. And I know how that feels. I get it. And here's something that might help you and help you take a pause to think about what tools you have access to. And there's a specific scene that I like to mention where it's a very on the nose metaphor. Like I don't totally spoil it. It's only 42 pages. It takes like maybe 3 minutes to read, but she's at this shop trying to figure out how to help herself. And around her are all these other people who look different than she does, but she knows they're there for the same reason. And that really changes everything in that moment so that she understands I'm not the only one going through this. Because I know for me, I felt like I just had a switch go off in my brain where I saw the world completely differently all of a sudden. I don't know if it was like that for you, but I just felt like I couldn't relate to anybody anymore. That I was in my 20s. We were all, building our lives and our careers and having fun and going out and trying to meet people. And then here I was in this big dark cloud. And I felt like nobody I knew understood it and could relate to me. And honestly, some of them were quite mean to me because they didn't know how to manage themselves through it, like stopped inviting me to things and told me like I recently learned because I didn't study any of this when I was in it,
Mm.
and I really don't even now, that like you have a lot of brain fog and forgetfulness when you're grieving. And I would leave the stove on, and one of my roommates would yell at me about it and be very unkind. And I would never intend to leave the stove on and try to burn the house down. My brain wasn't functioning, and she didn't wasn't aware of that either. But little things like that, where it's like the last thing I need is to be yelled at by my roommate about leaving the stove on. And I understand it's scary and everything. There's just a different approach, especially when somebody is going through something so hard. And so I wanted to give it
Mm.
this gift to others so that they could feel just at a minimum less alone. And I've been really amazed at how it's been received because I I needed it, and that's why I created it.
Yeah. And where can people get this book from? Where is it?
It's
What's
a,
the title and where we can get it from?
it's everywhere. I think it's on Amazon. I saw it was on some cool book selling site in New Zealand. It's on barnesandnoble.com. It's on my website, which is rwestpress.com/books. That's where there's a couple links of where you can buy it. You can buy it directly from the printer that prints it on demand or on some of those other sites. My royalties are higher from the printer, but you have to pay for shipping. People don't like that. So it's really up to how people want to get it. But my intention is to have it be places where it can serve people, like hospital waiting rooms and hospices wherever I can. And, bookstores are great and fun, and I love bookstores. I'm planning to do a couple local signings, but at the end of the day, I want it to be in community with people and that they can pass it forward.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And with regards to obviously the copywriting agency, again, is it just directly with your website that people can find you from?
Yep, popaandassociates.com. And we do websites, blogs, articles, newsletters, anything where we're helping you tell your story to the world about your business specifically. So we work with mostly small to mid-sized businesses that are in the lifestyle space. So restaurants, hotels, small kids clothing companies, things like that.
No, fantastic. And I have a question about obviously integrating your family and your business. Have you had any challenges, or is it how have you managed to work that out?
Oh, it's always a challenge. But even with the book, I think of this publishing business as another extension of what I do to help people tell stories. And I will I very intentionally take them with me. Like there are local bookshops that will sell books on consignment from local authors. And so I'll take my kids with me so that they can see
Mhm.
I'll wait to get them after school to take them versus going in the day when I have a free hour. I could have gone during that day, but I'll do something else so that I can take my kids and show them a different way of working. I'm very thoughtful about that. And then it's always schedule wise, it's always a juggle. My husband and I call it girl talking. He'll come when I'm showering and we'll chat about our day. And it's really day by day. It's either very last minute that we're planning or way in advance, usually both.
No, but it's nice though. I like the fact that you do involve the children as well, because they then get an understanding of what you do. And I
Hmm.
always say, with certain things they're not taught in school. So if you don't
Yeah.
do it, they're never going to learn and understand and know that, this, no, mummy's doing this and this is why she's doing that. Um,
Yep. I've even paid them to be models in some of the articles that I've written for the city that I lived in. When my client asked me if we would be in photos for it, I said yes, but it's going to cost you an extra X amount. And then I gave each kid their share so that they understand their dad has a very traditional job. I do not. And so they get to see and make decisions for their own life about what they want and how they want to navigate it. And I do feel very grateful that the world is a lot different now than when I was starting out so that they can see how many options are available to them.
yeah, no, that's fantastic. And they must, what do they say? Do they enjoy it or do they moan about it?
No, I mean, they're down for whatever. I explain things to them. My job is to communicate and I pride myself on being an over communicator with them. I find, and again, maybe I'm just projecting or thinking of myself in this, but it seems to be working. Being a kid is an out of control experience. You don't have a lot of control. And so I try to pre-explain and re-explain and remind them of all the things that I'm doing and why as it relates to them and an impact on them. And so they've never really griped because I tell them what we're doing and why. And if we need to negotiate something, we do. But they're really just awesome kids and been telling them about life since they were in my belly. So they seem to trust me and I don't take that lightly.
Oh, fantastic. And do you have any final tips that you'd like to share with the audience at all, or anything at all?
It's a great question. The thing that comes to mind and what I've been working on and what I like to reinforce with people is external validation is great, but coming back to my life in the past several years has been an exercise in coming back to myself and trusting myself. And I find that a lot of my schooling and training has been this process of asking others to pick me and to validate me. And in building these businesses, I've really had to bet on myself over and over. And I encourage everyone to do that, especially moms, whatever that looks like for you, to continue to check in with yourself and to believe in yourself and trust your own knowings, because I don't believe that they can steer you wrong. And it's hard to do that. It's hard to make that mental shift, especially when you've been trained out of it. But keep asking yourself for permission and trusting yourself. And even me with the book, I'll hear the little voice in my head say like, shut up about your book. Nobody cares to talk about grief. It's so awkward and weird. Nobody wants to hear about this again. And then I say it again so
Yeah.
that I can really train myself out of all of those thoughts that don't serve me and always know that like at the end of the day, I have a good community around me, but I'm the one who needs to give the approval. And that's a big difference than the way that I was raised in the world, and not by my parents necessarily, just by like the school system and the corporate system. So yeah, trust yourself and do what's right for you, even if it goes against your culture.
Wow, that's some fantastic, brilliant tips that you've shared there. And, I'm sure that will resonate with a lot of the audience as well, because it's something that you have to work on, So it's been absolutely brilliant having you on the show with me. And thank you so much for sharing all those tips and nuggets today.
Yeah, thank you, Esther. Thank you for creating the space. And if anybody wants to connect with me, they can find me all over the socials. I mentioned my websites, but my social media is at Whitpopa everywhere. WHITPOPA.
No, that's fantastic. And what I'll do is when your episode goes live, we'll have your links as well in the write up for the podcast. So that will be absolutely brilliant, and anybody can get in touch with you. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.